Today, we're going to talk about DACA, the Dreamers, and how current federal immigration practices are affecting a wide range of family law issues. For our discussion today, we have two attorneys here to help. We have Otis Landerholm, the founding partner here at Landerholm Family Law. Hey, Louis, how you doing today?
Good. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing well. And we also have Otis Landerholm. Otis Landerholm is the founding partner at Landerholm Immigration Law in Oakland, California. Is that right, Otis?
That's right, Steve. It's great to be
You're in
here.
Oakland now. So how you doing? So before we start in, let's sort of, hit the elephant in the room. Two Landerholms, two law firms. So what's the deal, Otis? How'd that come to be?
Yeah, it's like, do we know each other, Louis?
Well, who's the older brother?
Yeah. I am, sometimes I laugh and sometimes I complain that I was beat up in my childhood by Louis on the other end here.
I like it. Well, hopefully no beat ups today.
He'll have to play it easy on me.
There you go. So
yeah,
let's start.
I'll just say I was always proud, and I looked up to Louis. He was a great older brother. Louis, you're a great older brother. If I haven't told you before, I'm telling you now.
I like it.
Thanks. We had to toughen you up a little bit.
Yeah, it's good.
There you go. Well, let's start with DACA.
Cool.
It's an acronym. A lot of people think they know what it is. A lot of people aren't sure they know what it is. So, Otis, can you kind of give us a rundown of what DACA is and maybe what DACA isn't?
Yeah, and thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this and to have this conversation. DACA is confusing, and there are immigration practitioners, there are people that are policymakers that don't quite fully understand what it's about. But what DACA stands for is it stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. All right. And so what it basically does is, if you imagine a child who's entered the United States lawfully or unlawfully, but who is basically in the shadows, but has grown up here and they've known the United States to be their home, they don't have immigration documents. And so lots of these kids, right, grow up, their parents maybe brought them when they were quite young, and they don't have much in the way of a future. No eligibility to apply for citizenship, no eligibility to get a green card. They're kind of stuck. Even though they've gone to our schools, grown up here, there's 800,000 kids in this situation, all right? And so in 2012, the Obama administration passed a government program to give these kids not a green card, not a permanent status, but just a quote unquote deferred action, which is basically hey, we're not going to deport you. We're going to give you a work card, a work permit, and we're going to give you the ability to apply for a social security number. It's renewable for 2 years at a time. And in exchange for that, the immigrant, the child who's gone through this process, who now is, up to 31 years old on the date that they started taking the cases, those kids then were, had to come forward with their information, show their address history, show their family history, have no criminal history whatsoever. And then if they met the eligibility criteria, they could get this document.
So are these kids you're talking about, are these kids that we hear called the Dreamers?
Yes.
And how did they kind of to be called the Dreamers? Because again, I think that's another acronym that on a bill that didn't go anywhere.
Congress has tried, several members of Congress has introduced an act called the DREAM Act. All right, it was first introduced in 2001, later in 2007, later again in 2011, 2010, 11, and 12. And most recently, actually in 2017, it's been introduced. But every time that it's hit Congress, it has not made it all the way through, and you might tell from current politics or whatever, immigration is a tough issue to pass anything through Congress. And Congress is very divided, but really it is Congress's failure to pass the DREAM Act, which would have provided a permanent solution for this group of kids. Their failure to pass the DREAM Act is what led the Obama administration to say, hey, what can we do about this? And they ended up passing DACA, which again is not a law. It's just a government program that originally was passed for 2 years, and then they ended up making it renewable. But yeah, that's all it is.
So DACA, of course, has been in the news this last couple of weeks.
Right.
Was it a couple of years ago, President Trump, by another executive order, tried to disband the DACA program.
Correct.
And it was challenged. And I believe the Supreme Court last week or 2 weeks ago ruled that it can still go on. They didn't necessarily say it would go on forever, but it could still go on for now. So what is the kind of future of the Dreamers and DACA, and what do you foresee, at least in the near future, that's going to be happening?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So on June 18th of this year, the Supreme Court in DHS versus the Regents of the University of California, Supreme Court case about the DACA program, they said that the way that Trump terminated the DACA program was quote unquote arbitrary and capricious. It's kind of the legal words, and therefore it violated the Administrative Procedures Act, the APA. But they did not say that Trump can't terminate the DACA program. They just said that the way it was terminated when he made the announcement in the executive order in 2017 didn't comply with federal law. And so, in fact, USCIS, which is the agency that adjudicates DACA cases, it's where all your green card cases, they go through USCIS. USCIS issued a statement 2 days after the fact saying that they thought that the Supreme Court decision was meaningless, saying that Trump could turn around tomorrow and issue a termination of the program. And so practitioners like myself and many of us throughout the country are very apprehensive about DACA's future. And really, we think that people that have DACA, it's not a permanent status. And if you don't have a lawyer already, you want to get one, and you want to see what options you might have that are more permanent, that aren't just relying on this deferred action program.
It's like the sort of Damocles over these people. They're just waiting for it to fall.
Yeah.
It just is not the right way to go. So you mentioned green cards, and that brings another whole area where I think there's a lot of confusion.
Good.
DACA eligible people aren't people with green cards. Could you kind of fill us in and talk about the differences between DACA and some of the more traditional residence requirements and statuses that we have?
Good. Absolutely. So when I explain like immigration law, like the whole thing, right? Like what do immigration lawyers even do? It can be broken down into basically 5 things. All right. The first are what we call visas. Sometimes people need a visa to enter a new country, right? The second thing that we do are green cards, like what you brought up, family-based, or there are other types of green card categories. The third is asylum, and then U.S. citizenship, and then removal defense, deportation defense. That's basically all that immigration law talks about. Green cards, and just to be clear, DACA is not any of that. It's not a law. It's like nothing, all right? It really is. People have the short end of the stick if they have DACA. I mean, it's better than being undocumented, but just barely, all right? Green cards, like you mentioned, are 1,000 times better. They're 1,000 times better. Why? Because they're permanent. They give you the right to work any job you want to in the United States. They give you the ability to apply for citizenship after 5 years. It's like if you've got a green card, like, you know, we have 1 or 2 phone calls. So I run a law firm in the Bay Area. We get 1 or 2 phone calls maybe a month about people trying to apply for DACA, but we have people lining up out of our office trying to get a green card. Like, a green card is worth something. If you've got a green card, you want to fight for it, right? Because it's like a real legal benefit that allows you to travel in and out of the US, allows you to work freely in the US, and gives you the right to take advantage of US law.
Wow. You hear this term, the path to citizenship, and again, it gets conflated with DACA, but that really isn't DACA. There's no path to citizenship through DACA. That's where you need something like the DREAM Act.
Yes, that's right. That's exactly it. And that's exactly it, right? That's the frustration, that DACA provides zero path to anything.
Right.
Right.
So one thing, going back a little bit, you talked about the age of the DACA folks.
Good.
And that they're now getting it to be in their 30s,
Yep.
which kind of leads us into the second part of our discussion, which is, you know, immigration status, immigration law in general, and family law, and how they interact and affect each other, not always in very good ways. And so what I kind of like maybe to explore on that is, you know, we'll start with, you know, maybe the marriage, you know, before we get into comes the other things. But I know that, like you said, marriage really is not or a green card is not dependent on, or it can be dependent on getting married.
That's right.
But DACA doesn't have that green card. So again, DACA and marriage don't necessarily mix.
Let me
elaborate a little bit on that.
I love it. I love it. Perfect. So DACA is not a family-based immigration benefit, right? Green cards, though, can be. So here's the scenario, right? One of these kids on DACA now gets married. What do? All right. Say they get married to somebody who's a U.S. citizen. Okay, great. A U.S. citizen has the right to file what we call an immigration petition for a national spouse. All right, for a spouse, regardless of where they are and regardless of where they come from. All right. Now the question is can the spouse use that petition? All right. Can the spouse use that to apply for their own green card? And lots of people do. All right. And so, you know, if there's a kid who's on DACA and marries a U.S. citizen, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes they can use that marriage to then get a green card.
Well, Lewis, that kind of brings in marriage, especially if a marriage is really based just on trying to get a dream card, maybe, and then divorce. Do you see this when you're on your practice, when people come in who are in the situation where they are either have green cards or are undocumented and they're trying to figure out what to do?
Yeah, we see it. We see it all the time. We see it in a couple of different ways. And I've got a couple questions for Otis also that I think our clients would be interested in. So the first piece is the folks who come on a conditional green card. Their green card is conditioned on being married, and then inevitably something happens and they want to get a divorce, either party. What happens with the green card is a question that always comes up. Also, you know, in that green card, there's a requirement that they be supported by somebody here in the U.S. So I guess, Otis, if you could talk a little bit about what that looks like and how the system treats those renewals or that issue with green cards.
Yeah, thank you. The first issue is really, let me just make sure that I got it, and remind me, Lewis. You said that people going through the green card. Oh, I'm sorry, conditional green cards. All right. So thank you. So if a person comes into the United States or has a conditional green card where it's conditional on their marriage, and now they start to go through a divorce, it can cause a serious problem for their immigration case. All right. The first thing, we're lawyers. The first thing to advise is if you're in that process, you want to get an immigration lawyer who can help you through your immigration case, just like you're going to want a good family attorney who can help you with your divorce process. All right. The way it works, though, is that often immigration will interview you. They'll interview your spouse. They'll ask about the marriage. They'll ask about what happened to the marriage. All right. They want to determine that that marriage wasn't entered into solely for immigration purposes, because if it was, it's called a quote unquote sham marriage, and it makes a person deportable, right? They'll cancel that green card. They'll kick you out. So if you're going through that process, you want to prepare the request to remove your conditions very carefully. You want to prepare it with the best evidence you can possibly put together so that you maximize your chances of removing the conditions and then getting on with your green card. The second question that you asked is more about the quote unquote sponsorship requirement. And the sponsorship requirement is a requirement for going through the green card process. You've got to show that there's enough money there where you're not going to rely on the government for subsistence. So in other words, you've got to show that you're not going to be, the legal term is a quote unquote public charge on the like welfare system, food stamps, etc. So yeah, you've got to show there's enough money. And people do need sponsors that have immigration papers and who are willing to sign and kind of vouch for the intending immigrant, so that they're putting their finances at stake too and saying, yo, we are in agreement that this person will not become dependent on the state for any reason.
And so for those folks who already have this green card,
Yep.
They've got a conditional green card, it's already been granted, they're through the process, and then they want to get a divorce, and say their sponsor is either their spouse or a family member who then no longer wants to be required to sponsor this person. Are there any ramifications when a divorce is filed?
Good. The sponsorship requirement will go on. The sponsorship agreement actually goes through a divorce. And so, for example, when you sign on the dotted line for sponsorship, you're saying you're going to sponsor that immigrant for up to 10 years or until that immigrant becomes a U.S. citizen. All right. And you know, the divorce settlement or a arrangement in state court cannot undo it because of the supremacy clause. Federal laws trump the state law divorce proceeding. And so the immigration issue can be a serious thing you don't want to overlook it. And that's actually the importance of working with a great family law attorney, a divorce attorney on your case who gets this stuff, because they want to really analyze how the sponsorship issues in your case will affect you going forward.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah. And that's why we refer people to good immigration attorneys, because they need to, this stuff's complicated and you don't want to end up in removal proceedings by messing it up and, and doing something that you don't want to.
So Lewis, if I may, I have a question for you.
Sure.
How, from your perspective, how does the immigration issue come up in a divorce process? Like in the court process, for example?
So a number of different ways. The first is obviously the easiest one. If you have undocumented litigants and parties, then it dramatically impacts how how we handle them as attorneys. If we have, we obviously know that while state courts are not supposed to take into consideration immigration status, inevitably that's a public record. Those are public documents. It is something that most immigrants who are undocumented don't want to go to court. There is their right to fight for their case. It's their right to go to court and not have a circuit court judge, at least here in Oregon, take that into consideration. But the concern would be to avail yourself to the courts, to the system, and that's a scary thing for a lot of people. So we typically handle those out of court the majority of the time. We're trying to negotiate to be able to walk that line. From a custody standpoint, it's obviously something that can affect a case. You've got one party who is a citizen and one party who is undocumented. The party who's a citizen is inevitably going to be in court, and if there's a custody determination, say this person may or may not be in the country for any given amount of time. How can we give custody of kids to a person who may potentially get deported? So there's a lot of issues. It's something that is irrelevant technically in the case itself, but it inevitably comes into play, and it does impact a case, especially on the kid side. Not as much on the asset side. The asset side can be worked out a little bit more simply, as non-citizens can own property in the U.S. and that part's easier. But on the kid side of things, it definitely creates complexity.
Mm-hmm. That's really awesome that you're able to help a client from like a human perspective. If they're afraid to go into a courtroom, you're able to help them out and do as much as possible, settle stuff, get stuff done that really still protects their interests, but do as much possible outside of the family court. So that's just like another reason to have a lawyer who can give them good advice through the process. So anyway, I'm happy to hear that you're able to do that for people.
Yeah, we do it as much as we can. Obviously, the other side has to get on board with that, but typically that makes sense for the parties in general.
Good.
Well, you guys were talking about children, and that obviously in a divorce, husband and wife have their issues, but what can happen to children, or what if let's say an undocumented parent, or maybe they're both undocumented, get a divorce and end up leaving the country, having to leave? I mean, what's the deal with the children? Do they get some sort of special status, or are they just out there fending for themselves?
Yeah, those are some of the saddest cases. We've seen it in our office where parents get deported, and then the children come into our office asking how they can help them, help them to come back, right? And but we've seen it where after a deportation, sometimes the children will go with the parents back to their home country, or sometimes after a deportation, they will have a family member, an uncle or an aunt or something here in the U.S. who will apply through the family courts for a guardianship, so that they have like a new custodian, legal guardian here in the U.S. that can take care of the legal essentials for the child's well-being. But yeah, those are sad cases.
Wow. You talked about the monetary, the financial promise of the sponsor. If the sponsor can't do it anymore, they lose their ability to do it through whatever, or refuse, can that be a trigger to have the person deported?
Not specifically. However, so there's two things that come to my mind right there. The first is if the person ends up becoming what they call a quote unquote public charge, like say they need welfare, right? Say they need some social benefit, then what the sponsorship requirement means is that the government is going to come after the sponsor and say, hey, you owe us money. All right, you signed on the line saying you were going to support this person and you didn't because now they're on welfare. And so you've got to reimburse us to the amount of whatever public benefit, social Section 8 housing, welfare, food stamps, whatever that benefit value was, the sponsor is going to have to reimburse it. And if the sponsor can't, then they're going to have to deal with the IRS. I mean, they're going to have to deal with liens on their property, bank accounts, assets. I mean, they're going to be collected against.
Well, but they don't generally then turn around and go after the sponsored person.
No, it's not like a criminal issue, or it doesn't cause deportation per se.
Yeah. So Louis, can you fill us in a little bit on if you do have undocumented or green card or just immigrants coming in to have, let's say, a divorce? I mean, are you able to help them on all of those issues that can come into play? Temporary support, child support, visitation, parenting time, all of those things. Are you able to work with them on all of those issues that really are needed?
Oh, absolutely. Everything's available in the circuit courts. The circuit courts do not ask for immigration status, or at least they're not supposed to ask for immigration status in family law cases. In some criminal cases, there are circumstances where you do have to say whether you're a citizen or not, but that is not something that has to be discussed or talked about in a circuit court case. So you can absolutely use the courts to for custody support, all of the above. It's obviously a little more complicated with the fact that typically for garnishments and for those type of things, there's not always wages and W-2s to be able to get support, get child support. So there's obviously more complicating factors with cases like that, but we can have everything's available under the law in the U.S., or at least in Oregon.
In dealing with clients, I mean, obviously, then there can be some clients who are either non-English speaking or not fluent in English. How are you able to help those guys?
So we have a Spanish team on staff. So we have Spanish-speaking attorneys who work in both our Oregon locations and Vancouver, as well as Spanish-speaking support staff, throughout the ranks of the firm, so that we can represent the Spanish-speaking community. We don't have any other languages on staff, but our Spanish-speaking clients we're able to take care of them. And Otis, I believe you also you just have Spanish-speaking. Do you have additional languages for clients that you help with?
Yeah. I speak Spanish and I speak Mandarin Chinese, and we do have clients from all over, and in staff, everyone on my team speaks English and Spanish. Attorneys, paralegals, every single person on my team does, and we have interpreters that are really great that we can get in touch just on a moment's notice on the phone. It's very frequent that we'll be speaking with clients that speak Arabic or that speak Thai or that speak Mongolian or other languages. And so, we love it. Actually, it's part of the fun of doing immigration law.
And I should say, sorry, Steve, I should say that, we work with translators as well. So even though we don't have them on staff, it's something that we do all the time.
Cool.
We have a pretty good list of non-English speaking or folks who can deal with non-English speaking clients in financial, in housing, and I think we were talking about a guy who does ITIN loans, which people are able to buy houses even though they don't have a Social Security number. So it's kind of cool to do all that. Which kind of dovetails into the last thing I wanted to talk about, which was not necessarily, well, maybe somewhat the legal, but the legal and practical issues of access and compounded by fear of the unknown. Again, until there is a DREAM Act or there is just any kind of, appropriate immigration policy, which there
Thank you.
But until then, it's going to be hard just convincing people not to be worried because, the history of how they've been treated isn't the greatest, to say the least.
So true.
What do you see? Otis, do you see that as a problem? Just people who are afraid to connect with the legal system?
Absolutely. Right now there are 11 million people who are undocumented in the United States, a huge number, right? And 800,000, as I mentioned earlier, are on DACA right now. And it's a huge problem, and it's not going away. And I really want our, it's not just the Trump administration. It's like federal government, period. Congress, it's the whole thing. I want our leadership to take this they seriously from a, these are human beings involved, and they are for, lawful, unlawful, whatever the debate is, they are a part of our community. All right. And for people that are in that situation, if you're going through a divorce, if you're going through life changes, if you're going to have a new birth in your family, if you're going to need a will because you're going to, someone's facing the end of their life, don't be afraid to assert your rights as a contribution to our community, even if our community isn't giving you a quote unquote document. All right. Even though you don't have a quote unquote document, you still do have rights. And it's important that people know that and understand that and talk to lawyers that get this stuff and help you to exert your rights because you have them. All right. And so don't be afraid to fight your child custody case. Don't be afraid to fight, to file for divorce if you're in a relationship that's not working for you. Don't be afraid to do what you need to do. And certainly, talk to an immigration lawyer who can have your back going through any process, and see what options are available to you there. But really, my message for people is, Congress and the law and stuff, it will get its act together someday. All right. But in the meantime, you've got to live your life here now and do the things don't back down from living your life. If you need a divorce, go get one. If you need to fight for your kids, fight for your kids. All right. Because as far as we know, this whole thing called life, you only got one shot. So take advantage of it.
I love it. That's terrific advice. Hey, Louis, you got any last words?
No, that was better than what I would say anyway. So I'll stick with that.
Brother to brother. I love it. I just throw in that I used to work for a company that did preschool for migrants in Oregon. And you talked about the economic boom. Every summer, 350,000 migrants work in Oregon and, create a huge boon to the economy. So, got to be able to deal with everybody in this country.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
You bet. And with that, I just really want to thank you, Otis. That is wonderful. Thank you, Louis. This was a terrific Facebook Live, and I really hope people who have any questions, feel free to send them to me. Steve Altition, and it's at steve@landerholmlaw.com. Just shoot me a question, and I'll try to get it to one of these guys, and maybe we can get you answered. Also, if there's anyone out there who would like to be a guest, send me an email, or who has a suggestion for another topic, another day, send me an email. So again, I hope everybody has really learned a lot about this. It's confusing, but I think these guys made it a lot clearer. And want to also add, we have our podcast series, Modern Family Matters. Follow us on that. This will be transcribed to that. And if you want any more information, you can go to our Facebook Live page, our Instagram page, or the Apple Store, find out more about it. And with that, guys, thanks a lot. Thank you, people, for tuning in. And everyone, until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, enjoy the 4th, and thanks and bye.